In the dark window of a shuttered Main Street shop, a dozen clocks had stopped, each at a different wrong hour, under 12 years of dust. Marion Kowalczyk was 66, widowed, and down to $214, a rented room and a motel shift. After the illness that took her husband took their house too. She spent $5 on one raffle ticket. Her number did not draw the $500 in cash. It drew the shop, condemned, dark 12 years, assessed at $3,900, and a woman by the coffee urn said, not quite low enough, that she'd rather have had the money. But behind a cabinet that did not sit flush, and a back wall of newer brick laid by one hand alone, a dead watchmaker had sealed away 40 quiet years, and a debt no one ever charged him. It had begun weeks earlier, on a gray October morning above the laundromat, over a coffee can of $41. The room above Boyd's wash had a floor that told her the time of day by which machine was running. At 6:45 on a gray morning in the last week of October, it was the big dryer under the north window, and the thump of it came up through the boards and into the legs of the kitchen chair. Marion Kowalczyk sat in with a coffee can in front of her and a bank slip beside the can. She counted the can first because it was faster. $41 in bills, folded once, and a small drift of coins she did not bother to stack. The bank slip said the rest. A little over $200 when you put the two together. 214, to be exact. And she was a woman who had learned to be exact about small numbers, because for a long time now the small numbers were the only ones she had. She did not sit there feeling it. She had a shift at the Agate Beach Motel at 8, and she was already folding sheets in her head before she had put her coat on. 6 rooms if the couple in 11 had checked out. The corner she made on a fitted sheet was the same corner she had made on 30 years of children's beds, and her hands knew it even when the rest of her was tired. 2 years ago there had been a house. That was the plain way to say it, and Marion had gotten good at the plain way. There had been a house on Bellwether Street, paid off in full the summer. Stan turned 60, a thing they had done a nickel at a time over a working life. Him, a millwright keeping the machinery turning at the ore dock and the paper mill. Her taking in the county's children. Then the illness came for Stan. It took his hands first, so he could not hold a coffee cup, and then it took his voice, so that at the end she read what he wanted off his face, because he could no longer tell her. The years of that emptied the savings. After the savings there were the liens, the counties and the hospitals, quiet paper that attached itself to the house the way frost attaches to a window. And after the liens there was a notice on the door, and after the notice there was a room above a laundromat and a coat that was not thick enough for the wind that came off the big lake in October. She put the coat on anyway. She put the $41 back in the can and the can back in the cupboard, took the motel keys off the nail by the door, and went down the outside stairs into the cold. That was a Tuesday. The raffle had been that Saturday, and she had not planned to go, and the fact that she went at all was not about luck. The Kestrel Harbor Volunteer Fire Department held its winter benefit in the elementary school gym every year. In the last week of October, folding tables set up under the basketball hoops, and a coffee urn at the end of the long one, and a hand-lettered poster taped to the wall showing a thermometer for the food pantry the benefit stocked. Marion knew the pantry from the inside now. She had stood in that basement on a Thursday afternoon with a canvas bag, while a girl of 19 who did not know her checked her name off a list. And she had taken the peanut butter and the canned pears and said, "Thank you." And she had understood walking home that the benefit and the pantry and the girl with the list were now part of the machinery of her own life. So she went to the gym and she bought a ticket, and she bought it because the money went to the pantry, and not because she thought a number was going to save her. $5. 1 ticket. She could have talked herself out of the 5, and she knew it, but a person had to belong to something, and this was cheaper than most of the ways people belonged. The tables were busy. There was a raffle for a rifle, and a raffle for a snowmobile, and a long card table with the cash prize sitting on it in an envelope, under a paperweight, $500, and that was the table people stood near. She heard a man behind her tell another man what he would do with the $500, and it was a specific plan involving a transmission, and the second man laughed and said he had his own plans. Everybody there had already spent the 500 in their heads. That was what the cash prize was for. It gave a roomful of people who did not have much a place to put their wanting for an evening. The grand prize was not on a table. It could not be. It was described on a sheet of paper thumbtacked to the poster, and Marion had read it when she came in and thought nothing of it, because nobody wanted it, and everybody knew nobody wanted it. When the drawing came, a fireman in his dressed shirt stood up on the low stage with a coffee can of his own, the tickets in it, and did the second prizes first, the rifle and the snowmobile, and the room clapped for the winners the way a small town claps, meaning it. Then he reached in for the cash, and the number he read belonged to a retired teacher named Dolph Menzies, who stood up with both arms in the air like he had scored something, and the room laughed and cheered. And the man behind Marion said, loud, that Dolph did not even need it, which was the kind of thing you said when it was not you. Then the fireman looked at the last ticket in his hand, and at the sheet thumbtacked to the poster, and something went a little flat in his face, the way a man's face goes when he has to say a thing that is not going to land. And the grand prize, he said, and read it off the sheet the way you read a thing you are apologizing for. The Halloran Building, Main Street, Halloran's Clock and Watch, the shop and the lot. He paused. County assessed at $3,900. He said the number and did not editorialize on it, and did not have to, because the room did it for him. There was a beat of quiet, while people worked out that the grand prize was the dead shop on Main Street that had been dark for 12 years, and had a condemned placard in the window, the one the county had taken for back taxes and handed to the fire department because nobody else would touch it. Then the fireman read the number on the ticket. It was hers. She knew it before she looked, because she had bought exactly one, and she looked anyway, and it was hers. She stood up. She did not put her arms in the air. The room turned to see who it was, and when they saw it was the Kowalczyk woman, the widow, the one who cleaned at the motel, the quiet that came over the gym, was not the laughing quiet that had come for Dolph Menzies. It was closer to pity, and Marion felt it land on her and recognized it, because she had spent 2 years learning the exact weight of that particular quiet. A woman near the coffee urn said, not unkindly, not quite low enough, that she would have rather had the cash. Several people around her murmured that they would have too. Marion went up to the stage, and the fireman shook her hand and gave her a manila envelope with a key in it, an ordinary house key on a paper tag, and the deed transfer paperwork, and he told her the fire department would help her however they could. And she thanked him, and she meant it about as much as the room had meant its pity. She took the envelope because it was the only thing in the world with her name typed on it. 2 years of paper had taken her name off of things, off a deed and a title and a bank account, and here at last was a paper that put it back, even if what it put her name on was a condemned building full of stopped clocks. She did not go look at it that night. She went 4 days later, on the Wednesday, in the last of the afternoon light, because that was when her shift ended, and because she wanted to see it when there was nobody on Main Street to watch her see it. Main Street in Kestrel Harbor ran 4 blocks down toward the harbor, and then quit at the water. Halloran's Clock and Watch sat in the middle of the second block, a narrow brick front pinched between a shuttered insurance office and a bait and tackle that was closed for the season, and the wind came straight up the street off the lake and found the gap in her coat. The lettering on the glass had been gold once. Now it was flaking down to the black ghost of itself. Halloran's Clock and Watch, in an arc, and under it, smaller, repairs, and under that the condemned placard the county had wired to the inside of the door. She stood at the window before she used the key. She had not decided to. Her feet just stopped. Behind the glass, under a skin of dust thick enough to gray the light coming through, was a display case full of clocks. Mantel clocks and a wall regulator and a row of smaller pieces on a shelf, and every one of them was stopped. And every one of them was stopped at a different time. One said 4:10, one said a few minutes to 9. The regulator's pendulum hung dead straight down. It was a case of clocks that had all quit on their own separate hours over 12 dark years, each one running down alone whenever its spring had finally let go. And the effect of it, a dozen faces all telling a different wrong time behind the dust, was a thing she stood and looked at longer than she meant to. She did not have a word for what it made her feel. She only knew she did not like turning her back on it to work the key. The key stuck, then turned. The door came open against a wedge of cold air, and the smell reached her before she was over the threshold. Oil and cold brick and old dust. The smell of a place that had been sealed with its own air for a long time. She stepped in, and the floor was gritty under her boot soles, and the light from the street lay across it in a long, dim bar. She stood just inside and let her eyes work. She had cleaned a great many rooms in her life, and she had raised a great many children, and both of those had given her the same habit, which was to walk into a space and let it tell her what was wrong with it before she touched anything. The shop told her two things almost right away, and she did not go after either of them. She just filed them. The first was that the room was smaller than the building. She had stood outside and seen the width of the brick front, and she had a mason's daughter's sense of how deep a lot like this ran on Main Street, and the front room she was standing in did not go back as far as it should have. There should have been more shop behind the counter than there was, and low along the floor at the back, from the base of the rear wall, came a thin, steady draft of colder air, colder than the room, moving across her ankles. And when she looked at that back wall in the dim, she saw that its brick was not the brick of the rest. The side walls were dark old brick, soft-cornered, the mortar gone crumbly and pale. The back wall was newer, the brick a flatter red, the joints tighter and more even, laid by somebody in less of a hurry and less long ago. A wall like that did not belong in a building this old, unless somebody had put it there on purpose, and a wall somebody had put there on purpose was a wall with a reason behind it. She noted the draft and the newer brick, the way she noted a lot of things, and left them alone. The second thing was the cabinet behind the counter. It was a plain built-in, floor-to-counter height, its back a panel of beadboard, the narrow vertical boarding people used to line the backs of things 100 years ago, and the back of it did not sit flush. All along one side the beadboard stood a hair proud of its own frame, an eighth of an inch, maybe less, the kind of gap you would never see unless your whole working life had been about seeing exactly that. The panel a cleaner catches because a rag snags on it, the drawer a mother finds because it is the one thing in the room that has been pushed a little too carefully back into place. Marion looked at the proud edge of the beadboard in the low light, and something in the back of her mind sat up. She told it to lie back down. She was not there for the cabinet. She had come to see what she owned. What she owned, mostly, was a dead man's workbench. It ran along the back of the front room, under the wall of newer brick, a heavy bench with a scarred top, and the tools were still on it. Not scattered, laid out. A row of screwdrivers gone from large to small, a set of tweezers, small brass-handled files, a loop on a stand, a spool of tiny paper tags on a string. There was a green-shaded lamp bolted to the back of the bench and a stool pushed in under it, pushed in neat, as if the man who used it had only stepped out and would be back to slide it out again. 12 years of dust lay over all of it, even in gray, so that the whole bench looked like a photograph of itself. A workbench a man had kept in order, and then one night simply left. She knew the man's name off the door and off the deed. Tobias Halloran, Toby. She had not let herself think the rest of it yet, standing on Main Street, and she did not fully let herself think it now. But it was there under everything, the way the cold draft was there under the room. She had known a Toby Halloran once. It had been a long time. She made herself look at the bench and not at that. Among the tools, hung on a small nail at the side of the lamp, was one of the paper tags off the spool, an old one curled. She turned it with one finger. On it, in a small, careful hand, pressed hard enough that the pencil had almost cut the paper, were 3 words and 2 letters. No charge, and then the initials, K.H. She did not know what it meant. She thought it was the shop's mark, the way a shop stamps a receipt, and she let it go with the rest. and only much later would she understand that she had held the whole secret of the man in her fingers in the first 10 minutes. In the first 10 minutes, and set it back down, because she had not yet learned to read his handwriting. She went along the bench opening drawers. That was the cleaner in her again, and something older than the cleaner. Every drawer in the bench came open at a touch, or already hung open a little, and each one held the ordinary sediment of the trade, mainsprings coiled in envelopes, a tin of tiny screws, crystals in paper sleeves, a jeweler's brush worn to a nub. Every drawer but one. The bottom drawer on the left side would not come. She pulled it, and it held, and she felt the specific small resistance of a thing that is not stuck but locked. She stood over that drawer for a while. She had raised 31 children over 34 years, most of them frightened, a good many of them arriving with everything they trusted in a garbage bag. And every one of them had found, within a day or two of coming to her, the one place in her house where they hid the single thing they could not bear to lose. It was never a good hiding place. It was always the obvious one. The loose board, the back of the closet shelf, the bottom drawer. Because a frightened child does not hide a thing to defeat a searcher. A frightened child hides a thing to have a place where it is safe from himself, from his own certainty that everything gets taken. She had learned never to go into those places uninvited. She had also learned exactly where they always were. And that same eye, the one that had never once been wrong about which drawer a scared boy kept shut, went straight down the row of open drawers and stopped at the one that was locked, and knew. She did not force the drawer. She would not have broken the drawer any more than she would have broken a child's box. She took the flathead screwdriver from the row on the bench, the medium one, and she worked it into the seam above the lock, and she was careful with it. Careful the way she had been taught by a life that things which are locked because they mattered to somebody once. The wood complained. The little lock was cheap, a brass thing, meant to keep a drawer honest and nothing more. And she pried at the plate, and not the drawer front, until the screws that held it gave, and the plate turned, and the drawer slid open on its runners with a small grit of dust. Inside were two things in one folded paper. The first thing was a photograph, face up, its corners gone soft and round with handling, the surface worn matte in a patch near the bottom, where a thumb had rested on it many times over many years. It was a color photograph, the color a little sunk the way old color goes, and it showed a boy of about 9 at a kitchen table. He had a bad haircut and a too big shirt, and he was not smiling so much as being told to. His shoulders up around his ears the way a child sits, who is not yet sure he is allowed to be where he is. There was a plate of something in front of him, and a hand at the edge of the frame setting down a glass of milk. Marion knew the table. She knew the oilcloth on it, a yellow print with small strawberries that she had bought at the hardware store on Bellwether and used for years, and thrown out when it cracked. She knew the window behind the boy and the way the winter light came flat and white through it. It was her kitchen. It was her table and her oilcloth, and at the edge her own younger hand setting down the milk, and the boy was a boy she had fed at that table in the winter of 1981, the first winter she and Stan had him, a boy who had come to them at 9, with a stutter so bad he could not get his own name out and a history behind him nobody would say out loud in front of a child. She turned the photograph over. There was nothing written on the back. She did not need it written. Under where the photograph had lain, wrapped in a square of chamois gone stiff with age, was a watch. She knew the weight of it before the cloth was all the way off. It was a railroad pocket watch, heavy, a big open-face movement in a worn silver case, and it was Stan's. It was Stan's father's before Stan's, the one heirloom the man had owned, and the one thing he had never been able to make run, a watch that had sat dead in a dresser drawer on Bellwether Street for the whole of their marriage, because no one in the county could fix a movement that old, and Stan would not throw it away. It had been lost or so, they had always said, lost or pawned in one of the thin years, gone anyway, decades gone. It was not gone. It was here, in a dead man's drawer, and when she turned it in the light the case had been polished bright, and the crystal was new and clean. And she pulled the stem and felt it wind, felt the tension of a mainspring that was whole, felt that the watch was not only found but repaired, brought back, made to run by hands that had known exactly how. Folded with it was the paper. She opened it partway, one fold, with fingers that were not entirely steady now. It was a note, in the same small careful hand as the tag on the bench, the letters pressed hard. A hand that had worked at the words the way a man works, at a thing that does not come easily to him. The first line said, "Mrs. K, I never knew how to say." She read that much. Then she folded it back along its crease and held it in her lap with the photograph and the watch. And she sat down on the dead man's stool under the dead man's lamp, because her legs had decided the matter for her. The town had called him a miser. She had heard it herself. The few times his name came up in 12 years, the lonely Halloran who never married and never gave a nickel to anybody and died alone at his bench. She had let it wash past her because she had her own troubles and because the man the town was talking about was a stranger to her, a shopkeeper she had lost track of a lifetime ago. He was not a stranger. He was Toby. He was hers and Stan's, one of their first, the frightened boy from the strawberry oilcloth, and he had kept a photograph of her kitchen soft, with handling for 30 years. And he had found Stan's ruined watch, somewhere across all that time, and made it whole. And he had written her a note in a hand that hurt to write, and never once brought it to her door. She did not read the rest of the note. She sat with it and the watch and the photograph in her lap in the cooling shop, and behind her, in the front window, the case of stopped clocks went on showing every wrong hour it had, 4:10 and a few minutes to 9 and all the others, each frozen where its own spring had let go in the dark. She had not touched the beadboard back, that stood a hair proud of its frame. She had not gone at the cold draft, crossing the floor from the wall of newer brick. She knew the way she had known which drawer, that there was more of him shut up in this building, that the wrong depth of the room and the too new wall, and the cabinet that did not sit flush were not nothing, were the same kind of not nothing as a drawer a frightened person locks. And on the counter by the door, where she had set down the manila envelope when she came in, there was a second envelope she had not noticed until now, pushed through the mail slot and lying face down on the dusty glass. A stiff certified envelope forwarded and re-forwarded, its corner stamped with a return address in Green Bay she did not recognize and would not, that night, pick up and open. She came back the next afternoon. She had not slept much. She had gone home Wednesday night with the photograph and the watch, and the folded note in her coat pockets, one thing in each so they would not touch, and set them on the kitchen table above Boyd's wash, under the bare bulb, and looked at them a long time, while the dryers ran their last loads under the floor. She had not read the rest of the note. She had told herself it was because the light was bad, and she knew that was not the reason, and she left it folded on its crease with the first line facing up. Mrs. K, I never knew how to say. She put the 3 things in the drawer of her own nightstand before she lay down. The way you put away a thing you are not ready to be in a room with. And she lay awake listening to the windwork at the window frame, and thought about the shop. She thought about the 2 things she had noted and left alone. The room that did not go back as far as it should. The beadboard back of the cabinet standing a hair proud of its frame. In the dark, she found she could see the proud edge of that bad board, as clearly as if she were still in front of it. The 1/8 of an inch of shadow along the seam. Until to 10, she understood that she was not going to be able to leave it much longer. So at 2 o'clock the next afternoon, before her shift, she stopped at the Agate Beach Motel and let herself into the maintenance closet off the laundry room, with the key the manager let her keep. And she took a flat pry bar and a claw hammer off the pegboard where the handyman kept them, and she left a note under the stapler saying what she had borrowed, and that she would bring them back, because she was a woman who returned what she took. Then she drove the 11 minutes to Main Street with the tools on the seat beside her, wrapped in a shop rag so they would not mark the upholstery. The light in the shop was different in the afternoon. It came gray through the front window she had wiped a clean patch on the day before, and it lay across the floor without much warmth in it, and the case of stopped clocks stood in it, showing all its wrong hours. 4:10 and a few minutes to 9 and all the rest, exactly as they had stood. She set the photograph and the watch and the note in a row on the counterglass where she could see them, because it seemed wrong to do what she was about to do, with them shut in a drawer at home, as if he should be in the room for it. Then she went around the counter to the cabinet. She knelt down in front of it on the gritty floor. Up close, the gap was plainer than it had been from across the room. The beadboard panel that made the back of the built-in was old, the vertical boarding grayed and dry, but it had been taken off and put back. She could see that now, because the paint that had once sealed its edge to the frame was broken along a hairline all the way around. A clean break, not a weathered one. Somebody had cut that seal with a knife and lifted the panel and set it back, and had done it more than once, over years, carefully, so that unless you got down where she was and looked along the seam in a raking light, you would think it had never moved. She fit the thin end of the pry bar into the gap at the bottom corner where it stood proudest. She had done this before. Not this, but the shape of this. There had been a boy once, one of the early ones, a boy of 10, who came to her with a dresser somebody had let him keep from wherever he had been before. The one thing he had, and the bottom drawer of it had swollen shut in the damp, and he would not let her call anybody to fix it. And he would not tell her why it mattered that it open, only stood by it white in the face. And she had knelt down like this, and worked the drawer loose herself 1/8 of an inch at a time so it would not split, because she understood by then that what a child cannot say is often exactly what he most needs done. She worked the bar the same way now. She did not lever hard. She rocked it, easing the old glue and the old paint, feeling for the give. The panel resisted, and then it gave, all at once, with a dry crack of glue letting go that was loud in the empty shop, and a puff of cold air came out of the wall behind it into her face. Cold and dry, and smelling of oil and metal, and the particular flat mineral cold of a masonry cavity that has held the same air a long time. She set the pry bar down on the floor. She took the loose panel in both hands and lifted it away, and leaned it against the counter, and looked into the wall. It was a shallow vault, no more than 8 or 10 inches deep, built into the cavity between the cabinet and the old side wall. And it was full from top to bottom of small brass hooks, rows of them screwed into a backing board, and on the hooks hung watches. She did not at first understand the number of them. Her mind gave her the parts before it would give her the whole. A pocket watch on a hook, open-faced, its case rubbed to a soft shine. Beside it a smaller hook with a wristwatch on it, the strap coiled up under the case so it hung neat. Below that, a mantle clock movement, just the works, the brass wheels of it catching the gray light, hung by a loop of wire somebody had bent for the purpose. A lady's pendant watch, another pocket watch, a row of them, and under that row, another row, and under that another, the hooks marching down the backing board and across it, and from every single hook, tied on with a short length of the same waxed string that was spooled on the bench, hung a small paper tag. She reached in and turned one of the tags to the light without taking the watch down. On it, in the small careful hand she now knew, the hand that pressed hard enough to score the paper, was a name, Vesterling. And under the name, the same 2 words and the same 2 letters she had held in her fingers the day before and set back down. No charge. K.H. She turned another. Pelk, no charge. K.H. Another. Aho, no charge. K.H. Another lower down, the string gone brittle and brown with more years on it. Sunquist, no charge. K.H. She knew these names. Not all of them, but enough of them, that the wall began to mean something as she read down it. Vesterling ran the hardware on Bellwether, where she had bought the strawberry oilcloth 30 years ago. Aho was the name of a girl who had been in her 2nd grade class with one of Marion's own Fosters a long time back. Sunquist she did not place until she remembered that old Nels Sunquist had had a railroad watch he wore to church, a thing he made a show of, and here it likely was, or its brother, hanging on a brass hook in a hole in a wall the town did not know existed. These were the town's names. These were the names of the people who had stood in the gym and felt sorry for her, and their parents, and their grandparents, The whole long roll of Kestrel Harbor, going back further than she could read the ink, and every last one of them had been given something for nothing by the man they called a miser, and none of them had ever known it, because the giving hung here in the dark behind a false wall where the giver could look at it and no one else could. She counted them. She did it slowly with a finger, the way she counted the bills in the coffee can at home, because she needed the number to be exact and because counting was a thing to do with her hands while the rest of her caught up. She lost her place twice and started over. When she had it, she sat back on her heels. There were a little over 200 of them, hung on hooks, tagged and repaired, and the number was the size of a town. To the side of the hooks, laid flat on a shelf built into the bottom of the vault, was a book. It was a ledger, a real one, cloth-bound, its spine soft with handling, the kind a bookkeeper would have used. She lifted it out with both hands. It was heavier than it looked, the way a thing is heavier when it is full. She carried it to the counter and set it down beside the photograph and the watch, and opened it under the gray light from the window. The first page was dated 1997, in the careful hand, the year the town said Toby had opened the shop. After the date, the pages ran in columns, one line to a job, and she read across the first line the way you learn to read any ledger, by finding out what the columns are, a date, a name, a short description of the work in the shorthand of the trade, words she half knew, a mainspring, a balance staff, a bushing, a fusee chain, then a column for the charge, and then a column for what was paid. In the charge column there was always a number. He had priced the work. He had known what it was worth, to the dollar, a fair price, for a fair job, and he had written it down. $40, 65, 110 for something that must have taken him a week. He knew exactly what he was giving away, because he wrote its price beside it every time. And in the column for what was paid, on line after line after line, going down the page and on to the next page and the next, was the same thing in the same hand. Paid in full. But it was not the customer who had paid. At the bottom of each entry, small, were the initials again. K.H. He had marked every job paid in full, and then signed the payment with his own initials, because the one who had paid was him. He had done the work, priced it honestly, and then quietly paid the bill himself and handed the clock back mended and told the family there was no charge, and logged it here so that the books balanced, so that in his own accounting nothing was ever simply given, everything was paid, only always by the same hand. She turned the pages. The years went by in the top corners, 97, 98, 99, a page or two to a year at first and then more as the shop got known, 2000, 2001. Names she knew and names she did not. Here and there a line where the paid column held a real amount and a real name, someone who had insisted, someone who could afford it and would not be told no, and those were the exceptions, 1 in 10, 1 in 20, scattered through pages and pages of paid in full, K.H. The town had walked past this window for 16 years and pitied itself its bad luck to have a cold miser on Main Street instead of a proper jeweler, and the miser had been carrying the town's grandmother's clocks home to them, one at a time for nothing, and writing it in a book he hid in a wall. She was most of the way to the back of the ledger before she found the page that was different. She almost turned past it. The hand was the same, but the ink was not. All the rest of the book was in a black ink gone a little brown with the years. This one page, near the end, was in a blue ink, and it was not ruled into the columns like the others. It was written plain across the page like a letter to nobody, and it was dated later than the pages around it. 2009. She read it standing up, bent over the counter, and she read it twice. There was no customer name on it. It began with the watch, a railroad-grade pocket watch, it said, and gave the movement, the maker, the serial, in the exact language of a man who could not help being exact even here. And then it said where he had found it. He had found it at a pawn counter. Beckstrom's Loan and Jewelry, on 3rd Street in Ashland, the county seat, 40 minutes down the shore. It had been pawned there, the entry said, and not redeemed, and had come up for sale, and he had recognized it. He did not write down how he recognized it. He did not have to. Marion stood very still over the page. She knew when it had been pawned without his having written that, either, because she could count too. Ashland was where they had gone. She and Stan, in the middle years, the years the bills came faster than the millwright's pension, before the house went. There had been a stretch when small things kept quietly going missing. From the house on Bellwether, and Stan would not meet her eye about it, and she had not let herself add it up. Because adding it up would have meant knowing what her husband was doing to keep them a little longer ahead of the count, eh? Selling off the small, worth a working life a piece at a time, so she would not have to be told. His father's watch had been the one thing she was sure was only lost. He had told her it was lost, himself, and she had believed him because believing him cost less than the truth, and the truth was that he had carried his own father's railroad watch down the shore to a pawn counter in Ashland in a bad month and left it there, and come home and told his wife it was gone, and Toby had found it. 6 or 7 years later, 20-some years after he left their house, a grown man with a shop of his own, he had walked into Beckstrom's on 3rd Street on some ordinary errand, and seen his foster father's watch lying in a case among strangers' pledged things, and he had known it. The entry said what he did next in 5 words: bought it back. $60. He had paid the pawn counter $60 of his own money for a watch that was worth more than that and meant more than any price, and he had carried it home to Main Street, and the rest of the page was the trade again. The movement stripped and cleaned, a new mainspring, a new crystal, a balance repoised, the work of months set down in the shorthand of a man doing the one thing he knew how to do for the 2 people who had done the one thing for him. And the last line of the page was not in the language of the trade at all. It said, "Return to the drawer, not yet given, not yet given." He had fixed it and wrapped it in chamois and put it in the locked bottom drawer of his bench with the photograph of her kitchen. And there it had waited, ready to be given, from 2009 until the night 4 years later, when he sat down at that bench and did not get up, and it had gone on waiting 12 years more in the dark, until a woman won the building on a $5 ticket and pried the drawer. Not yet given. He had been getting ready to give it. For 4 years he had been getting ready, and he had run out of years. Marion closed the ledger. She stood with her hand flat on the cloth cover for a while, and did not open it again. Then she straightened the 3 things on the counter: the photograph, the watch that she now knew the whole road of, the folded note she had still not finished, and she noticed, because the light had gone amber and low and thrown everything into relief, the other envelope, the certified one. It had been lying where she left it the day before, face down on the dusty glass at the end of the counter, forwarded and re-forwarded, its corner stamped with the return address in Green Bay. She had walked past it twice today. She picked it up now, because she had run out of things to do that were not that. She turned on the shop's one working lamp, the green-shaded one bolted to the bench, and its light made a small warm island in the going dark. And she sat on the stool under it, and slit the envelope open with the flathead screwdriver still lying there from the day before. It was a letter from a law office in Green Bay. She read it slowly, the way she read anything that came from people whose business was taking things off of other people, because she had learned in the 2 years of liens and notices that these letters mean exactly what they say, and no more and no less, and that the trouble in them lives in the precise words. This one was polite. It was not a threat. It was worse than a threat, in a way, because it was calm. It informed her that the firm represented Mr. Dennis Ostrander of Green Bay, Wisconsin, age 47, who was, it said, the nephew of the late Tobias Halloran through Mr. Halloran's half-sister, the late Carol Ostrander. It informed her that Mr. Halloran had died without a will, intestate, 12 years prior, and that no estate had been probated at that time, because the estate had been believed to consist only of a condemned and valueless building. It informed her that Mr. Ostrander, having lately learned of the transfer of that building and of the possibility that its contents were of value, had filed a claim in the probate court of Ashland County to be recognized as the sole heir of the Halloran estate. And then it came to the sentence that the whole polite letter had been walking toward, and the sentence was this: as the decedent's sole surviving blood relative, Mr. Ostrander asserts a claim to the entire estate, including any items of value located on the premises. There was a case number, there was a filing date, and the filing date was 11 days past, which meant this had been true and moving through a courthouse 40 minutes down the shore for a week and a half, while she had been prying open drawers and counting watches and not knowing. And there was a final paragraph that requested, pending resolution of the claim, that Marion Kowalczyk take no action to sell, remove, alter, or otherwise dispose of any of the contents of the premises, any items of value located on the premises. She sat under the green lamp with the letter in her hand, and behind her, in the wall, hung 200 watches a dead man had spent his life giving away, tagged with the names of half the town, and here on paper was a man in Green Bay she had never heard of, who had never once come north in 12 years, asking a court to give him all of it. By the plain law of it, he was not wrong to ask. He was blood, and she was not. She had spent her life understanding exactly that blood is what the law counts, and love is what it does not. That a boy could live in your house for 9 years, and call your husband by a name close to father and still belong, in the eyes of every office and every form, to the people whose only act had been to give him up. Toby had known it better than anybody. That, she thought, was probably why the wall. She looked instead at the ledger's front cover, which she had not studied closely, and inside it, tucked into a paper pocket somebody had glued there for the purpose, were a few small things: a stub of pencil, a folded receipt, and a business card, yellowed, the corners furred, the kind a professional man had printed a lifetime ago. Harlan Pruitt, it said, attorney at law, a Kestrel Harbor address on Water Street, and a telephone number with the old exchange. She called it that evening from the room above Boyd's Wash, standing at the window with the lake going dark, not much expecting the number to be good after all these years. It rang a long time. A man answered, an old man, the voice thin and careful and entirely awake, and when she said her name, there was a silence on the line that went on long enough that she thought the call had dropped. Kowalczyk, he said finally. He said it the right way, the way Stan's people said it, and not many did anymore. I wondered if I would hear that name. She told him what she had, some of it, the building and the drawer and the wall of watches, and she told him about the letter from Green Bay, and she asked him, because she did not know how else to ask it, whether he had known Toby Halloran. I knew him, Pruitt said. There was another silence, shorter. Mrs. Kowalczyk, I am 84 years old, and I have kept one client's business private for nearly 30 years. And I am not going to stop keeping it on the telephone with a woman I have never met. And I hope you will understand that as a good sign about me rather than a bad one. But I will tell you 2 things tonight. He paused, and she heard him breathe, and she waited, because she had spent her life waiting on people to get a hard thing out. I hold papers of Toby's. I have held them a long time, and any claim on his estate, that man in Green Bay or anyone else, will have to come through me before it comes to anything. Do you understand what I am telling you? No, Marion said, because it was true. Good, he said, and she heard something that was almost warmth in it. An honest answer. Come to my office. Not tomorrow, I am slow in the mornings now. The day after in the afternoon. Bring the letter. Do not sell anything, do not move anything, and do not let anyone into that building. And then, before she could answer, quieter, as if to himself, he always said someone would win it. I thought he was being fanciful. He was a fanciful man under all of it, though no one would credit it. And he said good night and hung up before she could ask what he meant. The next morning she went to the county building instead of straight to her shift, and traded the shift for a later one to do it, because a thing had occurred to her in the night that she could not leave alone. On the tags, and on the ledger, and on the tag by the bench, the initials were the same. K.H. Not T.H. His name was Tobias. His name was Toby. The initials of a man who signed everything else in this world, Tobias Halloran, when he gave something away, were K.H. She wanted to know what the K was. She thought the Foster office might have it. Some old file, some name before the name. because she had learned long ago that a child comes to you already carrying names from before, and sometimes the one they answer to is not the first one they had. The county foster care office was 2 rooms at the end of a hall, and the caseworker was a young man, Mong, maybe 30, with a tidy desk and a way of listening that she recognized because it was her own. The listening of a person whose whole job is to hear what someone is not managing to say. His nameplate said Reggie Vang. She told him she was trying to trace something about a man who had aged out of the county's care a long time ago, back in the 80s, and that she knew this was probably not something he could give a stranger. And she was ready for him to say no. She said the initials before she said the name. She said she was looking for a man whose things were all signed K.H. And she was trying to understand why, because his name started with a T. Reggie Vang went still. It was a particular stillness. She had seen it before on children, the stillness of someone who has just heard, out loud in an ordinary room, a thing they had carried alone so long they had stopped believing it was real. He set down the pen he had been holding. "Say that again," he said. K.H. Marion said. "No charge, K.H. It's on everything he gave away. I found about 200 of them." The young man was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke his voice had changed, gone lower and more careful. "When I aged out," he said, "the year I turned 18, I had nothing. That is not a figure of speech. I had a garbage bag and a bus pass, and in the second week I had an envelope, no name on it, left for me at this office, and inside it was enough for the deposit on a room, first month, and a receipt from the shoe store on Bay for a pair of work boots, already paid, my size, that I just had to go and pick up. I asked everybody. Nobody would tell me who. The only thing on the envelope was 2 letters in pencil." He looked at her. K.H. I have wondered about those 2 letters for 11 years. I aged out the year after Toby Halloran died, and I never once put those 2 things in the same room until you walked in here." Marion sat down in the chair across from his desk, because it seemed the thing to do. "I fostered him," she said. "Toby, my husband and I. He was 9, he was one of our first." She had not said it out loud to anyone yet, and saying it to this young man, who had gotten his boots from the same hand, was easier than she would have thought, and harder. Reggie Vang looked at her for a while. Then he said, "There are more of us. If it was a fund, and it ran that long, and it did for others what it did for me, then there are more of us, and the county will have some of it on record, even if the money was quiet. Because a kid aging out leaves a paper trail, even when the help doesn't." He was already reaching for a pad. "I can pull what I'm allowed to pull. I can find the years, the count, maybe the names of the ones who'd want to be found. I owe that much to whoever K.H. was." He stopped and corrected himself, gently, as if trying the fact on, to Toby. She did not tell him about the letter from Green Bay. This morning belonged to the boots and the envelope and the stillness that had come over him, and she was not going to put a lawyer's claim into the middle of it. She thanked him, gave him the number of the phone at the room above Boyd's Wash, and went to her late shift, folding sheets at the Agate Beach Motel, with her hands doing the corners, while the rest of her walked up and down the ledger's columns. She went back to the shop that night to lock up before the cold really came down. She did not need to. There was nothing anyone could take that she cared about now, and the town did not know there was anything to take. But she had spent her life closing up rooms full of things that mattered to somebody, and she could not leave the wall of watches open to the dark. She fitted the beadboard panel back into its frame as well as she could, though it would not seal again, and it stood a hair proud of the frame just as it had, and she thought that was right, that it should show, a little, from now on. She set Dennis Ostrander's letter squared up on the counter, where she would see it first thing when she came in, next to the photograph and the pocket watch, so that the claim and the reason the claim was a lie by every measure, but the law would sit side by side, and she would not be allowed to forget either one. Then she stood a moment at the back of the shop, under the wall of newer brick, where the cold draft still came thin and steady across the floor, from somewhere behind that flatter red brick with its 2 even joints. It moved over her ankles the way it had the first day. She had more now than she had come in with, and less. She had 200 families who did not know they had been carried. She had a nephew in Green Bay, with a lawyer, and a real claim and no idea what he was claiming. She had a boy grown into a caseworker, who owed his boots to a man he never met, and had gone still as a stone at 2 letters of the alphabet. She had an old attorney on Water Street, holding papers he would not describe. And she had, still, at her back, the biggest wall in the building, the one she had noted the first hour and left alone, the newer brick and the cold that leaked from behind it, telling her the same thing it had told her at dusk on Wednesday, which was that the room did not go back as far as it should, and that whatever accounted for the difference was still on the far side of it, sealed, waiting, and had not moved. The pry bar was no use against brick, and she had known it would not be even while she carried it back to the motel closet and hung it on its peg. So the following week she borrowed different tools. The handyman had a short maul, 8 pounds on a hickory handle, and a cold chisel with a mushroomed head, and she wrote what she took under the stapler again, and drove the 11 minutes to Main Street with them, wrapped in the same shop rag on the seat beside her. She had studied the back wall for a week in her mind before she touched it. The brick of it was a different brick, and she had told herself that the first hour she stood in the shop, and had made herself leave it alone until the rest of the building had taught her how to read the man. Now she knew how to read him, and she came back to the wall the way you come back to the hardest sentence in a letter once you have read the rest. She set the green-shaded lamp on the floor so the light raked across the joints. The mortar between the newer brick was paler than the mortar in the old side walls, and softer and greener, the way mortar is for years before it fully cures, and she had a mason's grandson's memory of her father saying that a wall built in a hurry never quite catches up to a wall built slow. She fit the chisel into a bed joint low down and set the maul to it. It was hard, ugly work, and it took most of the afternoon. She was 66, and her wrists were not what they had been, and she stopped often and shook her hands out and drank from the thermos she had brought. But the wall gave the way a thing gives when it was built by one man working alone at night. One withe of brick, a single skin, laid up to close a space and not to hold a roof. She took it out course by course, stacking the brick to the side the way she would fold towels, and the cold draft that had crossed the floor at her ankles for 2 weeks came full into the opening now. That flat mineral cold of shut-in air. And when she had a hole she could put the lamp through, she understood what the draft had been telling her from the first day. The room behind the brick was shallow. Toby had narrowed his own back room, floor to ceiling, walled off a slice of it no wider than a closet, and sealed the slice away. Inside there was almost nothing. Bare studs, a swept floor, and against the old exterior wall, a square of floorboards that did not match the run of the others, cut clean and laid back down. She pried them up with the flat end of the chisel and set them aside, and under them, bedded in the joists, its lid flush with the floor, was a safe. A floor safe, black iron, older than the shop, the kind that had come out of some bank or shop counter a lifetime before Toby was born. The dial was worn, the numbers around it dulled with handling except 4 of them, and those 4 were rubbed to bright brass by a thumb that had turned to them again and again. She knelt over it and read the 4 bright numbers and knew them the way she knew her own hands. She tried the year first, the year she and Stan were married, and the dial turned and the handle would not move. Then she tried the other date, the one that was written on the back of a photograph in her coat pocket. The winter a caseworker had brought a stuttering boy of 9 up the icy walk to their door and left him with 2 strangers, and the last number seated with a small oiled click, and the handle turned in her hand. Inside there was no cash. She had half expected it. Some part of her braced for a miser's hoard that would have made him small again, and there was none. There was a bound folder of documents, and she lifted it out and carried it to the counter under the lamp and opened it, and the first page was a recorded deed of trust with the Ashland County Recorder's stamp inked across it, and a date. 1997. The same year the town said he had opened the shop. She read the name of the trust across the top of the instrument in the clerk's typeface, and then she read it again, and she sat down on the stool. The Marion and Stanley Kowalczyk Foster Fund. She understood the letter then, the letter that had been on every tag and every ledger line, the case she had gone to the county to ask about. It had never been a name from before. It was their name. He had signed everything he ever gave away, not with his own initial, but with theirs in front of it. Kowalczyk, before Halloran, the family that took him in before the boy they took in, and he had done it so quietly that not one of the 200 people who carried his gifts home had ever asked what the K stood for. Behind the deed was the trust instrument itself, pages of it, dry and exact, and behind that a slim appraisal folder. She read the appraisal last. It was for a small collection of clocks, English, signed bracket and long case, fusee movements, the makers' names meaning nothing to her and everything to the appraiser, who had totaled them at the foot of the page. About $340,000. The clocks themselves were not in the safe. They were held somewhere for the fund, the instrument said, and their worth was the fund's endowment, the engine that paid it out. Toby had spent his life buying and mending the finest work of dead Englishmen and had given none of it a place on his own walls, because it was never his. It was the machine. There was a cover letter in his hand, a few plain lines, and she made herself read it slowly. It said what the fund did: first month's rent, a pair of work boots, a starter tool kit, whatever the trade, for every child who aged out of the county's care with a garbage bag and a bus pass and nowhere to be. And the last line of it was not exact at all. It said, "So nobody starts the way I almost did." She sat a long time. She did not weep, or not much, and she did not think the word she knew, a lesser telling would want her to think, that he had been good. She thought about arithmetic. She and Stan had given a frightened boy one warm winter and a name to answer to. And the boy had taken that one kindness and built it into a thing that had gone on handing itself to strangers for nearly 30 years. Longer than she and Stan together, longer than he had lived, he had not paid them back. He had done something harder to name. He had made the kindness into a standing account that could not be closed. She took the folder to Harlan Pruitt 3 days later. His office on Water Street was one room over a shuttered chandlery, a coal stove in the corner, and a roll-top desk, and the smell of old paper and pipe tobacco, long gone cold. He was smaller than his voice had been on the telephone, a spotted hand on a cane, but the eyes were awake. He put on glasses and went through the folder page by page without a word for a quarter of an hour. "This is my hand on the drafting," he said at last. "I have administered this instrument for 28 years. I filed it myself." He set his finger on the recorder's stamp. "You want to understand one thing, Mrs. Kowalczyk. And then the man in Green Bay is a great deal less frightening. This trust was created and funded in 1997. It is irrevocable. Toby put the endowment into it while he was alive and well, 16 years before he died. Property placed in an irrevocable trust is no longer the man's to leave anyone. It was gone from his estate the day he signed it." He looked at her over the glasses. "There has never been anything here for Dennis Ostrander to inherit. He has filed a claim on an empty box." Reggie Vang came by Pruitt's office as they finished, with a folder of his own. He had pulled what the county would let him pull. It was a list of years and initials and small disbursements, not names, mostly, but the years ran back to the early 2000s and forward to this one, unbroken, a line of children a year, sometimes two, boots and a deposit and a toolkit, quiet as weather. On the last page he had let himself find one name, because it was his own to give. His own, dated in the spring of 2014, the year he turned 18, the year after Toby Halloran died at his bench. The fund had reached him a full year after the man who built it was in the ground, which was the whole of Pruitt's Point made flesh, and Reggie had known it the moment he saw the date. Pruitt arranged the sit-down himself. In a plain meeting room in the county building, a long table and folding chairs, and a window, with the first hard snow ticking against it. It was not a courtroom, and he had been careful that it would not feel like one. Dennis Ostrander came up from Green Bay alone, without his lawyer, which Marion had not expected and thought better of him for. He was 47 and looked older, a big man gone soft, in a good coat a few years out of date. The coat of someone who had once done well and was pretending he still did. Reggie was there. So were a few others, Reggie had asked, standing at the back and not crowding, a Vesterling from the hardware and old Nels Sundquist's daughter. People whose family names hung on brass hooks in a wall none of them had seen. They had come to stand, not to shout. Pruitt laid it out on the table without heat. The recorded trust, the date, the word irrevocable, the appraisal. He stated that the building had been won by Mrs. Kowalczyk at a public raffle run by the fire department fairly, on a $5 ticket, before a room of witnesses, and was hers outright by the plainest title there was. He stated that the endowment had never been part of any estate. He did not raise his voice once. And the quiet of it was worse for Dennis than shouting would have been, because there was nothing in it to push against. Then Marion did the only thing that was hers to do. She took the photograph out of her coat pocket, the boy of 9 at her kitchen table in the winter of 1981, and she set it on the table in front of Dennis. Beside it, she set the note, still folded on its worn crease, the first line facing up, Mrs. K. I never knew how to say. She did not tell him to read them. She just put them down, where a man could not help but look, and she sat back. Dennis looked at the boy in the photograph for a while. Reggie spoke then, quietly, from where he stood, and told the room what an envelope with 2 pencil letters on it had held for him. The week he had nothing, the deposit and the boots already paid for at the store on Bay. And how he had wondered 11 years who left it. He did not perform it. He just said it, the way you report a true thing. Dennis Ostrander put the photograph down and rubbed his face with one hand. I run a contracting outfit in Green Bay, he said. Ran. It went under 2 years ago, and I am behind on my house, and I got a letter that said there was a building up here that might be worth something, and I did the arithmetic a broke man does. He looked at Marion, not at Pruitt. I never met him. My mother didn't talk about her family. I didn't come up here to take boots off of kids. He was quiet a moment. I'm not going to be the man who did that. I'll sign whatever ends it. Then, lower, if it's a fund, put me on the list of people who gave it something. It won't be much, but not nothing. Marion did not say anything triumphant. She looked at the tired man across the table and thought that he had told the truth in a room where a lie would have cost him less, and that this was not a small thing. Come in the spring when it's open, she said. Bring whatever you can. There's a boy every year who needs boots. You'll know how much a pair costs better than I do. The shop reopened in the second week of December. On the first day the snow really stood. Marion had not resealed the back wall. She had cleaned the broken brick away and framed the opening plain, and the shallow room behind it became the fund's small office, a desk, and a filing cabinet, and a light, so that the giving that had lived in the dark behind that wall for 16 years happened now in a lit room a person could walk into. Pruitt was stepping back at 84, and a small board was forming to carry it. Reggie and a banker and a retired teacher, and they had asked Marion to sit on it, and she had said yes. The front of the shop, she made a working bench again. She could not do the fine watch trade herself, but she knew people who could. And a young woman from Duluth was coming down 2 days a week to take in repairs, and the green-shaded lamp was lit in the window, in the evenings now where the town could see it. Toby's own bench she left exactly as it was. She did not move his tools, the small screwdrivers in their block, the loop on its cord, the spool of waxed string. Reggie had asked her once, gently, whether she meant to clear it and use it, and she had said no, that the bench stayed, and he had understood without her having to say why, and had only nodded and said it was right. They came in that first month, a few of them, grown now, the ones Reggie had found. A man of 30 who drove propane trucks and had gotten his first toolkit from an envelope with 2 letters on it. A woman who taught in Ashland and remembered the boots. They did not make speeches. They came in out of the snow, stamped their feet, looked at the lamp burning in the window and the bench that stayed as it was, and stood a minute and left. It was enough that they knew the room the giving had come from. On the last evening of that week, Marion stayed after the young woman had gone. The light outside had gone the deep blue of a snow dusk on the big lake, and she stood at the front window where a stranger passing on Main Street 12 years running had seen a case of stopped clocks, everyone showing a different wrong hour, 10 past 4 and a few minutes to 9, the window of a dead shop. She had wound them over the last weeks and set them, and oiled the ones that would run and set aside the ones that needed the young woman's hands, and they ran now, all of them, in a lit window, telling the same true time together, and from the sidewalk in the snow, it would look like any shop where the lights were still on, and someone was keeping the hours. She took Stan's railroad watch out of her coat pocket. She had carried it there for weeks. One thing in each pocket so they would not touch, and she wound it now, the way you were meant to, feeling the mainspring take up against her thumb, and she held it to her ear and heard it run, the small even tick of it that Toby had given back to a spring that had lain silent in a pawnshop case in Ashland and a locked drawer for years on years. She did not put it back in the drawer. She put it in her coat pocket, where a working watch belongs, and left it there. Then she sat on the stool under the lamp and unfolded the note the whole rest of the way, past the first line she had been able to read for weeks, and read it to the end. Mrs. K. I never knew how to say it when I was small, and I am no better at it now. You and Mr. K did not owe me one thing. You gave it anyway. I have tried my whole life to keep it going out the door, the way it came in the door to me. If you are reading this, then it worked. Because someone would have had to win the building for you to be standing here, and that means I am not. And it also means the shop found its way back to you, which is the only will I ever wanted to leave. Everything here is yours. It always was. Toby. She folded it again on its crease and sat with it in her lap, and the watch ticking in her pocket, and the clocks all telling the same hour in the window, and she thought about the account he had made that could not be closed, and how it had come around, after everything, to her. There is a question in a story like this that she turned over and did not answer, and it is the one worth leaving to you. When someone takes in a frightened child and asks nothing back, and that child spends 40 years quietly paying a debt no one ever charged him, is the debt ever really paid? Or is the paying the whole of the thing the only way any of it was ever meant to work? Tell me what you think. I would like to know.